I saw a little opening, and I dashed across and kneeled in front of my father. And I said to him, "Tata, they won't get me, don't worry." I turned the lapel of my coat. We had cyanide sewn in. And my father looked at me. He said, "No, child, you must live." And I lived.
You had a photograph of your father that you lost. Could you tell us about that?
While we arrived in Majdanek and we were marched to the shower, of course, we knew what showers meant, and we were absolutely sure that this was the end of us. And by then, we were already separated from my father. And a Nazi guard stopped me, and he said, "What are you hiding?" And I said, "I'm not hiding anything." He says, "I know you're hiding something." And I quickly was thinking, if I had the only thing I had was my father's photo under the lining of my shoe. So I thought that maybe being honest and showing him that that would be of no value to him. And I said, "Oh, that's all I have is that photo of my father. That's all I have, and it's of no value to you." And he snapped it.
So the three of you, your mother and your sister Freda and you, were sent to the first munitions camp at Skarżysko. And could you talk about your work there and what was life like at that camp?
We were lived in barracks, like several hundred people in one room, on shelves. No mattresses, no blankets. I don't remember even having a comb or soap. Or there was a washroom that was like a long stall with a pipe with little water trickling out. Starvation, mistreatment, and a quick thought came to my mind. I don't remember who I mentioned to, I think yesterday at your house, Daryl, that children remain children at heart. That in Skarżysko, in that camp, what we were doing is sorting bullet shells. And anyway, my sister and I made up a game. And when the guards were walking away, we would quickly say to one another whether there was a pair of something or not, of the shells. And my mother, when the guard would come, would clear her throat to warn us, and we would, of course, we were working all the time. Anyway, my incoherent way of saying that children remain children at heart, even under the worst of circumstances. And I think that is such a beautiful aspect of children and humanity, and also the wisdom of young people. Young people are very astute, very resilient. They know right from wrong. And I think that is wonderful.
It's an understatement to say that your mother was a remarkable woman. Could you tell us about the incident at Skarżysko where she confronted a brutal Nazi guard?
We were marched from the factory to the barracks, to the camp. through a no man's land. It was a stretch that was abandoned and that was sort of periphery between the world out there that seemed so remote to us. You know, it was impossible to believe that a few rabbit hops away from us, people sailed on silver lakes, and people, our children, sat around dinner tables with families as families should. We might as well have been on another planet. We had no idea if the Allies were winning or losing. And so when we were marched through the gate through the no man's land, through the gate, there were Jewish capos, Jewish policemen. And one Jewish policeman jumped on somebody who was marching and hitting him. And now there were Nazi soldiers. We were not so much afraid of a Jewish policeman. A Jewish policeman wouldn't kill any other. I've never seen that happen. And there were the Nazis with the guns and German shepherds. To this day, I'm afraid of the tiniest little dog. And my mother just jumped out and said, what you are doing to your fellow Jew, the blood from the grave will follow you. And we were so frightened. So I guess that was her humanity, that her values rose above the fear of death, and the fear of death for her children too. So I don't know what possessed her at that moment, but she just could not endure it.
Right. At Skarżysko, you and your mother and sister were referred to as the three monkeys, and it was an affectionate term.
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Yes. My mother was in Majdanek and Skarżysko, I possibly too, I think was the only mother that I am aware of. And we were the only family of 3 people that I am aware of. Everyone else was alone. I mentioned that we had no soap and no towels, and we were covered with mange and lice, and all we had on was a loose kaftan. In Poland, it's quite cold in the winter. And so we picked lice from each other's heads because it itched. It was so uncomfortable. So we looked like little monkeys. And so our friends affectionately called us the 3 monkeys.
Oh my. In the summer of 1944, you were taken to yet another concentration camp to work in another munitions factory, and it was another very difficult winter.
Yes.
And then in January 1945, you were liberated by the Russians. But liberation was not at all what you were expecting. Could you talk about liberation?
So we were liberated in 1945, in January 1945. And Poland is quite cold, so the ground was covered with snow and ice. And all we wore was a kaftan, a loose kaftan, wooden clogs, no stockings, no underwear, no sweaters. And as I mentioned, we're covered with mange and scabs. And one night we hear a rumble of planes. And we hear bombs drop, and we say, "Oh, the bombs, dying by Allied bombs would have been such a dignified death." And so we just didn't. We hoped that the bombs wouldn't stop falling, And then, you know, this was from September 1939 to January 1945. And we were liberated that morning. And we didn't have a penny in our pocket. We had no home to come back to. And unfortunately, there's something about human beings that often likes to gang up against minorities. And unfortunately, in Poland, there was still anti-Semitism. There were also good people, but we wandered through Poland, then through Czechoslovakia, into Western Germany, because my mother had siblings in the United States, so we were hoping to establish contact with them. We didn't have any money, or we didn't even have any addresses. So eventually we did come to the United States. We came with the $30 in our pocket. My sister and I started to work in a garment factory in New York. After with 3 years of formal education, some tutoring in the ghetto, my sister maybe 5 years and some tutoring in the ghetto. We took college entrance exams, and we entered college. My sister became a professor of comparative literature. I became a teacher, a very meaningful part of my life. I am mentioning this for one particular reason. The inspiration to be the best that we could be came from the darkest place. Remember, I described to you when we were in the bunker and the world was crumbling around us. My father had a tutor for us. I guess that was his way to deny that his children had no future. To me, having the tutor when the world was literally crumbling was, yes, you are human, you have a future.
You know, you have a smile on your face most of the time, and you have this positive attitude. You aren't bitter. You're an inspiration. Where do you get that from? How do you pull that out?
You know, there's been so much shooting going on now, and it makes me feel, of course, very sad, and it makes me feel sad that there's so much anger and destruction and suffering in so many countries and so many places. And I feel that suffering everyone suffers. That suffering does not have to drive you to anger and despair, that it can teach you to love more deeply and be compassionate and take joy in life. Life should be lived joyfully.
Well, you certainly are doing that. We're going to do a Q&A, and then I want you to do a concluding statement. Do you want to do it now, or do you want to wait till after the Q&A?
Well, I want to thank everyone so much for being here. It is very difficult to speak about such painful events because it generates such pain. And to listen to you, but we have to be reminded from time to time. You know, as long as Darfur happens, as long as there are people who are saying that the Holocaust never happened, in some ways Auschwitz and Majdanek are still with us. I think that history always remembers. I think that your teaching and everyone's being here is testimony that we want to remember so that our children and the future generations inherit a better world than I am leaving.
Let's give her a huge thank you. That was beautiful.
And I'll be so pleased to hear your questions and then sign books afterwards. And I want to point out that my book is not all that dark, that my book in a way shows that the courage and love that shines through human beings even in the darkest places.
And it's beautifully written. It's beautifully written. I'm going to ask for some questions.
I want to stand up.
Do you want to stand up? Good.
Yes, but I am tethered here.
Let's see now.
And this is why I'm limping.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Okay, now I'm free.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to repeat the question so that everybody can hear it.
And I am not, my hearing is
Okay,
not
and so that
right, good.
we can all hear it. Okay, so if you have a question, and we don't want to fall off here now.
No, absolutely not.
This is not good. Okay, do you know how many Jewish people were killed during the Warsaw Uprising?
So in the ghetto, I have no idea, but I know that of the freedom fighters, of the people who were active in the uprising, that only 60 escaped through the sewer. If anyone else did, I don't know. And I know that there were 400,000 people at one point in the ghetto. And I know that very few, I don't know how many survived.
I know someone who might know. Where's Steve? He said that there's no way of knowing exactly how many were killed, that there were only about 1,000 left, right? When it...
There were about 4,000 people in the Warsaw Ghetto at the end of the ghetto uprising.
Right.
There were about 4,000 people in the ghetto at the end of the uprising.
Right, so it's estimated that the young, about 1,000 young people died in the fighting, but there were civilians who died in the fighting. Because the Germans did not discriminate. They just shot, or they torched buildings. It was not a simple battle. So there's no way of knowing exact number.
Okay.
And actually, the fighters were civilians too. They were not soldiers.